and welcome to another episode of But Have You Heard About? I'm your host, Courtney, and I am joined again by my friend Trisha.
I'm back.
From outer space. I mean, we are talking about some space-esque sounding things. We're talking about time balls. Oh my gosh, are we in harmony? No. So we're talking about time balls because as it being the new year, many people, for whatever the fucking reason, decide to stay up and watch the ball drop on New Year's Eve. Where did this whole idea of the ball come from? It's such a weird conception. You're like,
it doesn't feel weird because we're so indoctrinated with this, but yeah, today we decided to find out, why is there a ball? Why does it fall?
So the ball itself, like New Year's Eve in Times Square, has happened since 1907 and has had some sort of ball drop with lights every year but 2 years, where they had the dim out during World War II, which was 1942 and 43. And basically, they went to go ring in the year at a church instead in New York, which seems kind of weird. I'm like, how's everybody going to a church in New York City in the 1940s? But, you know, I guess everybody was fighting with World War II, so like half the city is probably gone.
Well, we realized that this was, not an original American invention, as they want you to believe. We went back in time. We passed Greenwich, which used the time balls for maritime navigation. We went all the way back to ancient Greeks. At this point, it wasn't called the time ball, but it originated in the city of Gaza. And time ball stations set the clocks according to transit observation. So we're looking up in space, because that's, the best clock that we've got is also the star positions.
Yeah, and let's not confuse time balls with space balls.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Space balls is much cooler and more important than time balls.
But the thing is that time balls are needed because it has to do with navigation, and it's there for sailors. So you had these buildings. They're not near lighthouses. They're different than lighthouses.
But I feel it. It's very important. Similar.
Yeah, and it's a needed thing. So you have these big buildings, these tall ass buildings, and they have, what's those tall things? It's like a
spire.
Like a spire. Yeah, it's a spire. But at the bottom or at the top of the spire,
this giant ball. And it's in daylight, because lighthouses are important to not crash into everything. But we got to know what time it is so we get these deliveries on time. We're going to lose our job as a trader.
Well, yeah, and to navigate the seas, because using time would help with like the longitude, I think it's longitude for maps and shit. Like, I think that was 9th grade world geography. We were supposed to learn some stuff about how people did this. And honestly, it was a fail thing in the fact that I would not have been a sea person. I would not have been a pirate or a sailor.
I agree. Yeah. Not selling it to me.
No, like, if I was around in the 1800s, 1600s when they were doing this shit, I would have preferred to be, I guess, a teacher. Like, they got to treat kids like shit then. And I mean, I like kids and I treat them really, and I coach kids sometimes. And I feel like I do a great job but I'm like, yeah, if like any job back then, teacher. But they didn't have very many women teachers because it was like you could be a teacher till you were married.
Yeah, I don't think you'd want to be a salty woman on this high seas, probably, this point.
So, back at hand, time balls. Like, where did this whole, like, notion of these balls? But...
And why are they dropping?
Yeah.
Because it was the easiest mechanism, I guess, at that point. I would assume that they put a ball on a spire on top of something tall, and they drop these at the same time every day. It says in here 1 o'clock. Who knows?
Yeah.
But when you're on your ship and you're out at sea and you see the ball fall, you're like, oh, it must be 1 o'clock. I better check my clock and make sure it hasn't gotten way out of control.
So the sailors would know for, their positions and whatnot if they're going near a harbor. Because you're not near, like, if you're sailing, you're most likely not near a harbor, but then that at least helps you, like, if you're sailing anywhere along those between Europe and Africa, and even into, like, the Mediterranean area, there should be a whole bunch of harbors, like, points of, like, what are those things called?
Ports?
Ports. Not points. Ports, yeah. That's where I'm at today.
Like the delicious drink.
Yeah. So you have ports, and you would see those balls, like, that's where and they look, so, like, if you look at a photo, it looks like some pretty, like, as Trisha and I were talking before about, like, it's kind of like religious architecture.
Yeah. That's what I loved about this, is I thought that all of these old historical buildings, that they look like they're churches. And this whole time, those aren't crosses that you're seeing on all of these buildings. It's a spire with a crossbeam above where the ball is. And at the end of the crossbeam, you can see that they're tethered to the structure. And from a distance, it looks like a big cross with a ball in the center. But that's not what these are. And I love it. And, as time progressed, people probably slapped a bunch of antennas on these things. But that's where this came from. And they were usually large, giant red balls. And it says that following the introduction of the electric telegraph in the 1850s, they started doing these remotely. So I'm impressed with the technology.
Yeah. I think at one point, 150 or so public time balls were believed to have actually been installed after the success at Greenwich for helping the navigation stuff. So 1800s, you're having this, and obviously we don't need it anymore, right? Like we have better navigational systems, we have better communications and radios and that stuff. However, it is a tradition, especially in like naval cities, places like the United States Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C., where the time ball descends from a flagpole at noon each day. And of course, we have the once a year Times Square time ball that drops.
And as most white people do, they do claim that they invented this, even though, as we explained before, the Greeks were onto this way before white people in England. But apparently in 1829, a guy named Robert Watchup decided that because he was a captain in the Royal Navy, he was going to slap one up in England. And so he is supposedly the inventor of this.
Probably, we can call him the modern day inventor.
Oh, all right. But in 1833, shortly thereafter, Greenwich started their main time ball, the time ball, which all other time balls were set to by.
Yeah.
And it says since then that they still drop it at 1 p.m. every day.
Yep, start at noon to get there by 1.
Yeah. And then you're late for lunch.
Yeah.
The United States Navy established one in Washington, D.C., and the first American time ball went into service in 1845. So that's where we start our story for Times Square.
Yeah. So still talking about time balls, there's still 60 time balls that are standing around the world. While many of them are not maybe in fully operational function, they may not even be on time. They're more of, I would say, just kind of, an ode to a now obsolete part of history and technology. Mm-hmm. But it's still a cool thing knowing that this was, this is how you got the time ball dropping on New Year's Eve, was because of sailors needing to know the time for their longitudinal coordinates. So now we've talked about time balls. Let's talk about the actual Times Square New Year's Eve.
The most famous balls of them all.
The most famous ball, just one. They only got one. Okay?
Well, they had many through the years.
They did.
They're probably somewhere in someone's shed.
They have to be, you have to think about this, with so much, garage history type of stuff, where people find,
oh, man, I would buy the shit out of that, but I bet it's as big as your damn car.
And the thing
is... Maybe bigger.
But also, do you think people, I think there's at least one in someone's, fucking
I feel like that's
barn.
a museum piece.
Yeah, but it's probably in someone's barn.
That's a pretty cool thing to say that you have.
Yeah. So, again, it started in 1907.
Organizers haven't seen the ball in the Western Union building. So they saw this shit on the building, and they're like, we could totally do that and get some people here. And then they thought, 60 seconds, we could maybe time it.
Yeah.
First version, somebody in New York that had the power to do so said, hey, the Western Union building has this time ball that drops, and let's light one up and do it for 60 seconds before midnight. So that's kind of a wild idea, but it sticks with them coordinating the public on a set time. So,
talking about the famous ball, the first New Year's Eve ball was made of iron and wood and was adorned with 125 watt light bulbs, or was adorned with 100 bulbs that were 25 watt. It was a diameter of 5 feet and weighed about 700 fucking pounds.
Oh, okay, so that's a reasonable size. But she's a big girl, yeah.
That's a lot. That's some strong man stuff you gotta pull. It was, as American as it sounds, it was built by a young immigrant metalworker named Jacob Starr, and for most of the 20th century, the company he founded, sign maker Arcraft Strauss, was responsible for lowering the ball.
Excellent. I love the name.
It's a good one.
But then the musicians came in later. So the first organizer was Adolph Oakes. He owned the New York Times newspaper. So yeah, men with money and power.
I mean, the New York Times has been around forever, so it makes sense to have somebody from there.
And they were already doing the fireworks on top of the building anyway.
Yeah, because they had started having some celebratory moments for New Year's Eve, starting like a couple years before, like 1903 or so. But it became more symbolic and more organized once you had the ball dropping.
And I love the idea of like once they didn't even think at this point we're gonna be on TV at some point, re-aired to sync everybody's clock. Like the only people who could see this were the people that could get there and see it live.
Yeah.
And I'm just, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around that they weren't using that to sync the entire US, but at some point that's what it became.
I mean, just a few years later, in 1920, a 400-pound ball made entirely of wrought iron replaced the original. In 1955, the iron ball was replaced with an aluminum ball weighing a mere 150 pounds. The aluminum ball remained unchanged until the 1980s, which is pretty cool. And it was changed in the 1980s when red light bulbs and the addition of a green stem converted the ball into an apple for the I Love New York marketing campaign, which they used for 7 years.
I don't remember this, even though I was alive, and I probably did watch this as a child. But, I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Well, they only did it for like 7 years to celebrate again the I Love New York campaign.
And then they didn't love it anymore?
Well, New York was trying to go through that, trying not to be full of strippers and hookers and drugs.
That's a shame.
Well, not strippers, but definitely the hookers and the drugs.
Because Marion Barry came in the 80s and was like, let's embrace this.
Yeah, but like the 70s in New York was pretty bad. Disco in New York. Like if you go back and you look at Studio 54.
No account for taste.
First off, disco is amazing music.
Right.
You sit over there with your dirty mouth.
Let me take a drink.
So after 7 years of having this green and red monstrosity, they went ahead and went back to the white ball. Or the white lights and whatever.
I feel like it's when they changed Coke and people were like, this ball, we get it, but can we please have our old ball back?
Yeah, they just wanted, all they did was change the lights. That was the whole thing.
But still, a giant red glowing ball drop, like maybe that's a little much for people.
I think after a while you get the whole, oh yeah, I love New York.
Now show me something cool. I would have gone rainbow, but
Well, they do go with like a little bit multicolored later on with LEDs. Flash on. So after 1988, they go back to like the all white. In 1995, the ball was upgraded with aluminum skin, rhinestones, strobes, and computer controls.
They bedazzled it.
But that aluminum ball was lowered for the last time in 1998. So only 3 years.
And it lives somewhere.
For Times Square's 2000, so 99 going into 2000, the Millennium Celebration.
Yeah, you had to rock it for Y2K. Yes.
Exactly. It was complete, like the ball itself was completely redesigned.
We were expecting it to go out.
Yeah, I didn't expect.
And the whole world blacked out. So
yeah, so F that shit. Just go balls of wall.
Instead, we just all blacked out.
So it was redesigned by Waterford Crystal and Phillips Lighting. The crystal ball combined the latest in lighting technology with the most traditional of materials. It was kind of used as like a euphemism to be like, look into the new millennium. And now I'm like, we got fucking COVID. I'd like to go back.
That's true.
Like, I'd like to go back to the 90s.
We would like to call those the good old days.
Like, I like 90s rap better than, like, today's rap. But anyways, so a few years later in 2007, for what would be the 100th anniversary, they were like, look, we gotta, like, go...
Go big or go home.
Exactly. And so they used a new LED crystal ball.
And they got on board. They heard my rainbow shout out.
They did. I mean, you probably remember this because this was 2007. That's not that many fucking years ago. 15 years ago. I think I actually watched it then maybe. But also like my ass always goes to bed early. It doesn't matter. Aww. But anyways, you had those like different color brightness. It literally rainbow fun times.
I love it. The more modern one is no longer rainbow, however.
Yeah.
It reminds me of Epcot, but it's blue and green.
Yeah, so they got rid of like the idea of replacing the ball or taking it down, and they now make it a year-round attraction so you can actually go see it versus, only being able to see it probably like toward the end of December. So now it's a tourist attraction itself.
Yes. And the climax of the festivities of the drop itself, which begins obviously at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, they drop it using a button inside a special control room with one Times Square synchronized to the National Institute of Standards and Tech time signal. So right back to our reason that we had time balls in the first place.
Wow. Mm-hmm. It's like we did a whole circle
of a ball.
Oh my gosh, we did a ball of knowledge.
Yay. It's not actually been dropped by a human being since 1996. It has been a robot takeover since that point.
But anyways, that's basically the history of time balls. And
now you know.
And now you know about time balls.
And why they fall. And who claimed to invent this. So now it's turned into let's have concerts and announcers and the fireworks and the craziness. But it's still a way that from home you can look around the clocks in your house at midnight and go, none of these match.
Yeah.
Let's go set my clocks correctly. Instead of making out with someone at midnight, you should do that.
Yeah. Get your life in order.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens if phone technology goes off? How your phone is calibrated to that. I mean, like, a lot of people have been there to, like, quote unquote count down. They're not the ones obviously pushing the damn button for the minute.
Oh yeah, it's all fake. Don't buy that.
Don't buy into that. Like, a celebrity is not in control of when it's officially midnight. They just happen to be there.
Yeah, it's ceremoniously activated.
Yeah.
So, fake.
But they do have, a lot of celebrities, as well as, just famous people in the U.S. have been ones who wish, wish us into the new year. And the fact that it's New York City that gets to be like the first one, they have balls that drop in freaking London. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Well, that's been it for this episode of But Have You Heard About? This is Courtney. I was today with Trisha. And we hope you have a fabulous rest of your day.
And Happy New Year.
Bye.